South Africa, as you could assume from the name, is the southernmost country in the continent of Africa, bordered by Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Eswatini, with the Indian Ocean to its east and the Atlantic Ocean to its west. Today, it is a very open multi-ethnic state with a thriving unitary government. It is currently known for factors such as its gorgeous scenery and vast cultural diversity. See, look at those happy little sock puppets coexisting. But life in South Africa wasn't always sunshine and rainbows. In fact, just 3 decades ago, South Africa was rising from a very dark point in time, the apartheid period. Apartheid, which is Afrikaans for apartness, began in 1948. But long before that, around 1652, was when the Dutch and British colonizers, who we call the Afrikaners or Boers, arrived in South Africa in search of land to colonize.
Oh man, real nice country you guys got here. It'd be a shame if someone were to colonize it.
The National Party of South Africa, or in Afrikaans, Nasionale Party, who were responsible for apartheid, formed in 1914. Apartheid did not take place in one specific area of South Africa. Unlike during the U.S. segregation period, where segregation took place mainly in the South, as shown in the map above, apartheid segregation spanned across the entire country of South Africa.
We are the Boer people of South Africa. Yes, a lot of people call us Dutch, but it's deeper than that. We identify with the culture we made for ourselves. Allow us to explain.
You see, Boer culture is a Creole culture, born from our original culture in the Netherlands and South African culture. We speak a language that is a mix of both Dutch and languages spoken by various African nations, which we call Afrikaans.
And to this day, Afrikaans is the third most spoken language in South Africa.
But keep this very important detail in mind. The Boers only made up 10% of the population in South Africa. So who made up the majority?
We are the native people of South Africa. We are African, but it's not as simple as that. We come from many different backgrounds. We originate from tribes such as Zulu, Ndebele, Swazi, and Xhosa people.
We speak the native languages of our tribes, but the Boers wanted us to learn Afrikaans since they believe they're better than us.
Yes, and during colonization, they took over all of our good land and resources without our permission. We do not have the money to fund a strong enough government that's fit to take on the Boers.
The native South Africans did make up most of the population, but there were still different ethnicities throughout the country. We were called the Indian people by the Nasionale Party, even though not all of us were Indian. Most of us were, but there were other Southwest Asians that were sorted under our label, such as Pakistanis. And there were also the colored people. They didn't like this term, but the Nasionale Party insisted on calling any non-Boer people who didn't fit in with the black South Africans or the Indians by this name. Before the official takeover of the Nasionale Party, the African National Congress was the source of government for South Africa.
We only make up so much of South Africa. What if we lose our culture and assimilate into South African traditions?
We're not quite South African and we're not quite Dutch. We started our own culture, but we have to keep it alive. But how are we supposed to do that if we're not even 25% of the population?
You know what? I don't know about you, but I think our culture is far superior to South African culture.
And we're most definitely richer than them, since we bought up all their arable land and goods. That definitely has to make us better.
But are you thinking what I'm thinking, twin?
Segregation!
Now you may be wondering how in the world the Boers managed to separate everybody else when everybody else made up 90 to 95% of the population. Don't worry, they'll gladly show you.
Divide and conquer! Woo! Now that we've decided we have something the rest of the population doesn't, we can start building our power. I think instead of kicking all the Africans, Indians, and colored people out of this country, we should just push them as far away from us as possible. But how?
Wait, why don't we set up little territories for every different tribe and ethnicity and force them to live there far, far away from us, and use military force and violence to keep them away from our land? We can call them Bantustans.
Why, that's a brilliant idea. Ooh, and since we have all the money, we can afford lavish living conditions in schools for ourselves, but spare no expense for anybody else. How's that sound?
Don't you think we're taking it too far? You know I'm only messing. There's no such thing as too far. Hey, why not on top of all of that? We enforce laws banning the rest of the country from traveling outside of their Bantustans to our land.
Unless they come here for work, but even then, we'll still hardly pay them.
Well, it sounds like it's settled. Let's form their Bantustans, make them stay there, and make sure our military lets them know if they try to fight back, it's gonna get ugly.
Yup.
And with that, the National Party was established and apartheid began. It was out with the old and in with the new. The African National Congress was banned. Now came the rule of the tyrannical National Party. The type of segregation is called de jure segregation because the segregation was actually due to enforced laws by the apartheid government, or the National Party. The Bantustans, or as the people living in them called them, homelands, were not pretty places to live in. The people were divided into their homelands based on their tribe of origin. For example, Zulu people were put into the homeland KwaZulu, Ndebele people were put into the homeland KwaNdebele, Xhosa people were put into the Ciskei territory, Swazi people were put into the Katangwane territory, and etc. Each territory did form a government for itself, but all of these governments were inferior compared to the National Party. The majority of the population, excluding the Boers, lost a lot of their privileges in the apartheid. Since the homelands were rural, they were banned from entering any urban areas unless for work, and even then, they needed to show a work pass. It was also illegal for South Africans to carry passbooks for the bank, publish in the newspapers, vote, and participate in political parties. And, as you may have guessed, Boers in the majority were strictly forbidden from marrying. Even engaging in sexual acts together was considered a criminal offense. Most of the violence towards the majority of South Africa was symbolic and economic. However, a lot of physical violence did take place during apartheid. Aside from the numerous armed soldiers and authorities of the National Party who did resort to violence whenever a member of the segregated majority attempted to fight back, Boers were legally allowed to beat and assault the people of the majority at a whim with no consequence. But it gets much darker than that. Multiple massacres that the Boers were responsible for took place during the apartheid period. One major example was the Sharpeville Massacre of March 1960 in Transvaal Province, South Africa. The protest of the South Africans rallied for their rights was said to be peaceful, but nonetheless, police forces opened fire against the mob. 69 people were killed and 180 people were injured during this tragedy. In June 1976 in Soweto, South Africa, the Soweto Uprising moved into play. Black, colored, and Indian students from schools protested restlessly for their rights. About 20,000 students took part in the protests. The police fired on the protest mobs, leaving over 1,000 children injured and nearly 200 dead. After the Soweto Uprising, activists in South Africa were furious and they were finally ready to snap on the National Party. This is where Umkhonto we Sizwe, whose name comes from Xhosa, Zulu, and Ndebele origin and meaning Spirit of the Nation in English, was born.
I am Nelson Mandela. I speak for the rest of the South African population when I say I've had it with the way the National Party is treating our people. We can't just take this from them any longer. When we're silent, they hurt us, but when we speak, they kill us. It's time we take it up to the next level. We need to fight the power now or nothing will ever change. I am forming a paramilitary wing of the ANC, and we plan to retaliate against the National Party. I don't know what they will do to us, but we cannot stay silent any longer. Now, my brothers and sisters, we need to stand on business. We will plan our first attack starting now.
Sir, yes, sir.
And they did exactly that. Mandela and his army launched many major attacks on the National Party, ranging from bombings, planting of mines, and firing of rockets. Eventually, in 1962, Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for his conspiracy to overthrow the government. He was meant to serve a life sentence, but only served 27 years. But even with Mandela in prison, Spirit of the Nation lived on and continued to launch attacks on the National Party. Eventually, Spirit of the Nation was recognized as a terrorist organization. Fast forward to the 1990s. The protests from the people, the attacks from the Spirit of the Nation, pressure from outside of South Africa, and international perspectives, as seen in situations like the people of the United States of America spreading anti-apartheid speech and the government of the United States of America speaking out against apartheid as well, the president of South Africa, Frederick Willem de Klerk, finally decided it was time for apartheid to come to an end.
Fine. As the president of this country, I think I'm making the right decision here. I'm going to put an end to all of this insanity and attempt to seize this violence. I'm putting an end to apartheid.
And as promised in 1990, President de Klerk officially ended apartheid. He lifted the ban on the ANC, abolished the homelands, and freed Nelson Mandela from prison. And amazingly, after de Klerk's term ended, Nelson Mandela was elected president of South Africa in 1994. This is definitely the good ending, but it wasn't a Disney happily ever after, as apartheid still left its scars on South Africa. Apartheid was officially over, and people of all colors were free to live and work where they pleased. But economic disparities between white and non-white citizens remained, leading to unofficial segregation as poor South Africans couldn't afford to purchase homes, start business, or attend schools in areas that were previously reserved for Boers. The homelands were officially no longer in existence, but many poor South Africans lacked the means to relocate and start over in new places. The relic boundaries, originally created and enforced during apartheid, were too entrenched to simply disappear with the passing of new laws.
Yo, we're finally free. So now what?
Maybe you should buy a house where you can afford one, brokey.
In conclusion, South African leaders Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk did the hard work of tearing down apartheid to give South Africa and its native population a chance at self-governance and equality. Challenges remain economically and culturally, but the end of apartheid was a victory for humanity and freedom. Progress has been slow, but South Africa can, with all the talents of its people, eventually find a way to create the nation Mandela and de Klerk imagined.
Let's try this again. I am South African. I am South African.
We are all South African. Let's rebuild together.